Right, I'm ready to go. So, 21st century students and authentic learning. What are we going to be talking about this afternoon? I'm going to ask you, though we're talking about 21st century students, and obviously we're going to be talking about technology, I'm going to ask you all to have some old-fashioned technology alongside your device that you are accessing this program, this webinar on, and that is a good old piece of paper and a pen or pencil. All right, if you can grab one of those, that would be useful. It's not compulsory, but there's something to be said for actually writing, the kind of aesthetic involvement that happens there. So when I ask you to reflect at one point about something, it might be useful for you to do that. I'll elaborate in due course. So we're going to talk about, sorry, one moment. I think everyone's microphones are muted, and you've obviously, most of you have found your way to the chat. If you haven't, or you're unfamiliar with Zoom, can I just say this at the beginning? Down the bottom of your screen, you will find the chat function. You can always click on that, and I will ask you at some point to participate in the chat. Meg, I'm going to ask you just to keep an eye on that as well, because unfortunately Zoom doesn't allow me to see this easily, but when everyone's chatting later, I will access it as best I can. Okay, so what we're looking at today is talking about the key skills for 21st century learning. I'm going to start with leading into that. We will obviously explore the elements of authentic learning. There is an authentic learning model by Harrington, Reeves, and Oliver that we use as the basis for one of our courses at Murdoch, and we'll explore those together. In the process, you're going to look at creating a plan for making learning more authentic. So you're going to have a bit of a hands-on session as well. This is not all just me talking. And finally, we'll critically reflect on how important it is to use technology to transform learning. Right? So everything will move towards that ultimate idea. Right, so what I want you to do to start with is I'd like you to think about your mobile phone. How has your mobile phone changed the way that you do things, right? Think of some of the things that it has replaced. And we'll use the group chat for this just so that we can kind of get a feeling from everyone of what it is. So think about the things that you no longer use because your mobile phone does it for you. But I also want you to think about whether or not you use it for learning. And if you do, how do you use it for learning and when? And just share your ideas on this in the group chat for us, with us now. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Right, so I see a few points coming up: camera, newspapers, alarm clock, calculator. Joining study groups, yes, so using it for connecting with others. Music, there's another one. Finding solutions to problems. TV, ebooks. I like the means, that the repeated idea of connecting and communicating. talk less and message more. Yeah. Right, well, I think you can see from the various responses in the chat that there are many gadgets that have been replaced. There's another one on a watch. Sorry, I have just seen a couple of people raise their hands. I don't seem to have a record here. Mega, if you can perhaps just check there if there's anything.
Yes, I have the ability to unmute them if they want to talk, but I believe the question and answer session, we would keep it at the end of the...
Yes, so we're going to do that way. And is there anybody who's not able to access the chat? I just don't want to exclude you from this process because you just haven't seen where to do that. Is there anyone who needs to just check on the details of that? If you want to unmute, if you've raised your hand, perhaps you could just either indicate in the chat you're okay, or if you can't indicate in the chat, we can see if we can unmute you and let you speak quickly.
One raised hand. I'll just unmute Mr. Hanan.
Yes, thanks. If you'd like to just ask your question. Hanan. Can you unmute her, Mega?
Yes, I have Hanan, but
no. Okay, bear with us. I just don't want to exclude people from the chat process, just in case people who've come in a little bit late need to know something. No? Okay. Well, hopefully, if you can just put your details in there. So we've seen lots of different things in terms of things that you use instead of mobile phones. Use mobile phones instead of. I think most of these were mentioned. I don't know if I saw the answering machine. That's a dinosaur that some of you may remember. Music, various sources of music. Calculator was mentioned. Did anyone talk about the torch? Right, so you can see there from the chat and from the pictures that there are many things that the mobile devices mobile phones in particular have replaced. And of course, we must remember that the students we teach, for most of them, these devices are an extension of their fingers. They are almost a permanent attachment. And we need to think about the implications of that, which we'll talk about in a minute. So what I need you to think about, clearly technology has changed the way we do a lot of things, right? The way we shop, the way we book travel, the way we use transport, the way we access entertainment, all of these things can be done very differently to the way they used to be done before. And we need to also think about, therefore, has it changed, or how has it changed the way that people learn or can learn today, both outside the classroom. So I've seen some of the things in the chat. You've talked about the fact that you use it to communicate, you use it to source information, all of those kind of things outside of the classroom. But how has it changed the way we do things in the classroom? And until fairly recently, it hadn't changed a lot of things. It depends. Many schools, schools differed a lot in this regard. We've had some schools who've really embraced technology and used it extensively in the classrooms, and others that haven't really used it at all. But of course, recently, we've I'm pretty sure everybody here, as teachers would have been forced, if you like, into the 21st century and to online learning by COVID-19. So it was a kind of facilitator of moving everyone into the online space a little bit more than they might otherwise have been. So this incident, this pandemic, has changed in many ways the way that people learn. You are all here today learning using your devices rather than sitting in front of me in a room at the campus, which would have been lovely if we could have done that, but we're here in this form instead. So it's changed, it has changed the way people learn. But what we're going to talk about today and what we need to think about today is how we are doing this and why we're doing things the way that we are. Because very often, people focus too much on the devices and the tools. People want to shortcut this process of the why and rather focus on the devices and the tools. And a few years ago, for example, iPads, I remember, were all the rage. And these tools come and go in terms of popularity, but iPads was the one that sticks in my mind. Everyone was going to have an iPad. One-to-one was the whole emphasis and ambition to get everyone using one of these devices. But in the process, there wasn't enough thinking about the why and the how. It can't be about the what. And the reason for this is that in the classroom, technology can be a catalyst of change, and we'll understand this concept, I hope, by the end of the session, but it's not the driver of change, right? And if we're looking to change the way we do things in education, that's your role, right? You are the drivers of change, not the tools. So the pandemic has kind of forced us into looking at doing things differently, but we need to consider what our role in all of this is going to be. So just a quick little bit of background here. If we think of the 20th century model of education, it was pretty much driven, first of all, by the needs of the industrial age, right? So we needed to produce learners who would work in factories, on assembly lines, and preferably didn't want people who thought too much, okay? If you were a cog in a machine doing a fairly mundane job, it would help if you didn't challenge the environment you worked in. You just did as you were told, right? So standardization and all of those things were perfect for that system. It was also very much, pedagogy was also very much informed by the behaviorist learning theory. And so you had this notion of the passive learner who responds to the stimuli in the environment, very much a sort of Pavlov's kind of idea. This is your teacher-centered model of education, which most of us probably grew up with. Younger ones, maybe you've been lucky to have had something different, but I'm sure you're all very familiar with the very teacher-centered model of education. I like to think of it, this is not my own metaphor, Mark Prensky talked about the 20th century model as being very akin to a train, right? So the metaphor of the train is useful here. If you think about a train, and if you think that represents that type of education, everyone sits in a compartment. They're all in rows facing the front. There's a driver at the front of the train. Everyone's going the same direction on the same tracks to the same destination, right? Standardization, think about it in terms, almost the carriages are like your cohorts, the different years or age groups of students. You start at the back of the train and you move forward year by year or compartment by compartment as you progress your way through the school. And in the process, you are fed with information which you store, because one day you're going to need it. When you get to your destination, you're going to need all this knowledge that you have been given and that you are storing. I'm sure we will all agree, though, that how much of that storage actually is still there at the other end is highly debatable. So Prensky suggests that we need a different metaphor for the 21st century model. So what we're looking at in the 21st century, pedagogy-wise, is an emphasis on a constructivist learning theory. So moved away from the behaviorist, and an understanding that really what students do when they learn is they actively construct their own understanding, right? They make meaning. And that's done based on their own experience and how they link it to their learning, and very much in the notion of social constructivism, co-constructed with the others learning around and with them, right? So this is based on the work of people like Piaget, Vygotsky, Brunner, etc. And the more appropriate metaphor in this case is a rocket rather than a train, okay? So the rocket represents the student-centered classroom. This is where your learners are active, self-directed. They've each got their own rocket ship to fly. They're not being driven by somebody else in a compartment full of others. It's very much, and if you think of students and how they learn outside of the school, with their mobile phones, it's on a need to know basis, right? So when they need to know something, they know where to go to find that information. And they use that for problem solving and sorting out things, making decisions, etc. Where's the teacher in all of this? I think the teacher in the rocket metaphor is probably best akin to an air traffic controller. So the air traffic controller needs to make sure that each of these rockets fly as far as they can and as safely as they can without all crashing and burning into one another. So the role of the teacher clearly has changed when we've moved from the notion of a teacher-centered to a student-centered learning environment. And what we've got to ask ourselves when we think about that model that was designed for the industrial age and was prevalent throughout the 20th century, it was really a design and a model for the past. Okay, and we really do need to think about whether we're still producing or preparing students for the future or for the past. And clearly, I don't think the past is where we want to be going with them. If we look at the world they live in, the world our students have grown up in, you may or may not have come across the term VUCA. It's used a lot in the business world to talk about the kind of world we're living and operating in today. VUCA is an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think we only have to look around us right now to know that that's very much the world we live in. Teaching students not to think, to do everything in a standardized fashion, all for the same outcomes, that is not going to help them in a VUCA world. So we really do need to rethink what our priorities are when we think about education, when we think about the emphasis of where learning should be. So not where the tools are, or not what the tools are, but what we're doing with them. And if we look at those tools, if you have just here's a quick sort of timeline of some of the tools that have come and gone over the years, you know, whether it was the chalk slate or the overhead projector, some of you may be old enough to remember those, the radio, the television, the heavy desktop computer, and then moving into some of the devices that you see on the right-hand side of the spectrum there, which are more familiar, but also notice how those have proliferated in a short period of time. So tools have changed over the years. That's not a new concept at all. Tools come and tools go, but currently they come and go at a much more rapid rate. So change happens much more quickly than it used to. But as I said before, it's not about the tools, right? Those tools keep on changing. What we've got to keep an eye on are the skills, and the skills that are constant throughout all of this. So Prensky again reminds us that we need to preserve those skills, the ones that are important from the past, and embrace the tools of the future at the same time. But the focus needs to remain on those skills. And so that brings me to the key 21st century skills, which have been identified and outlined in many, many different sources and forums, and essentially are agreed as the following. You just cast your eye down that list of 21st century skills and see if anything strikes you about them. These are not new skills, are they? Right? Possibly filtering and processing information is something we do a lot more now in the information age than was done before. That used to be done for you in an editing process, for example, in the form of a textbook. Now when you have ubiquitous access to information anywhere and everywhere, anytime, you've got to actually develop your own skills to filter and process. Interestingly, I think this is one of the skills that is still underdeveloped and not taught enough in schools, and one of the most important, which is why it's at the top of the list. But if we look at planning and organizing, decision-making, problem-solving, collaborating, sharing, communicating, none of those are new skills, but they are newly important, right? These things all become crucial in a complex and uncertain world. And of course, things like being creative and innovative were not priority skills in the industrial era and in the 20th century model of education. The last one on that list, just a quick mention, is reflecting. If we think about John Dewey's words, that is experience plus reflection equals learning. It's the fact that reflection is actually a crucial component, like 50% of learning, is again something that's highly neglected in schools, and I think something we need to really think about. So if we move on to talk about authentic learning and the creation of authentic learning environments, we need to think about this problem. How do we ensure that our learners are engaged, right? So whether this is in an online environment or even in a face-to-face learning context, how do we ensure they're engaged and motivated to learn? you consider that they learn outside of the school with these mobile devices permanently attached to their fingers, that they can find information when and where they want it. They may not know how to find it or how to appreciate and filter and process it, but they certainly know where to go to find it. And they are constantly bombarded with a lot of visual images, with a lot of activity, with a lot of variety, and things that motivate them. They may not be using their tools for learning. They may only be using them for fun, for communication, certainly. But if that's what we're competing with, because a lot of teachers will say, oh, but I don't know, how can I get them, you know, they get bored in the classroom because they haven't got their devices. So it's this whole notion of engagement and motivation that we need to think about. And this is where the whole idea of making learning authentic and looking at a model for authentic learning comes into play. So that's what we're going to have a look at now. Here's something for you to think about. We spend a lot of our time teaching students to pass tests, using worksheets perhaps, looking for the right answers. Yes, that will give them the high scores, but that is not going to prepare them for life. And I think if you look at this quote, it tells you exactly what authentic learning is all about. Preparing students for life. Authentic learning in a nutshell is real world learning, right? Learning that where the students can see what the connection is between what they're learning and what it will do for them in real life, where they will be able to use it in real life. If you've ever had students ask you, why are we learning this? Why do we need to learn this? I don't know, as a high school teacher myself years ago, that was the question that used to really make me crazy. Like, you know, students' immediate resistance to say, oh, why do we have to learn this? It's important that they know why they have to learn something. And that's where making your context and your environment authentic makes it much more obvious to them. So this is about not having decontextualized learning, not having things that are learning for the sake of a test or an exam or one right answer, but being able to connect it to real life. So I'm just sharing the model here with you quickly. Harrington, Reeves, and Oliver have written a guide to authentic e-learning, though this is not restricted to an online learning or virtual learning environment. This applies in any classroom and can have, in fact, can be used in a classroom where there's not even any technology at all. So the model, just very quickly, in the center, you'll see authentic context, task, and assessment. So an authentic learning environment will have these three items, and I'm going to elaborate on those in a minute. They are at the core of the model and at the core of the learning environment. And then there are these 6 other elements of authentic learning on the outside. Very quickly, these include expert performance. So that means students have access to an expert. In the real world, people learn from experts. That may be people they work with. It may be an expert who comes and gives a talk. It may be an expert who you can access online. It may be working with somebody and learning from them. So the original kind of apprenticeship notion of learning, going back hundreds of years, was an expert performance component of authentic learning. But you really learn from watching others and seeing how they do it, or them telling you how to do certain things. Then we have multiple roles and perspectives, right? You cannot, this is the antithesis of the one right answer idea that we have so much of in education, particularly in schools. The idea that students learn to play different parts, they have multiple roles, and they get lots of different perspectives and points of view. The third one is collaborative construction. And this, of course, fits with the constructivist philosophy, the whole idea that students construct meaning, that they make meaning. That's essential to their learning if they can create their meaning out of making connections between what they know and what they're learning. And of course, that this is done collaboratively. Learning is much more powerful when it's done in connection with other people, so that you bounce ideas off each other. The fact that you explain something to somebody allows you to articulate your own understanding, and somebody explaining something back to you reinforces that. So collaboration is essential. I've spoken about reflection already. That's a crucial element. Articulation and creation. Now this really refers to the creation of a product, right? An end product. In the traditional classroom, students were fed knowledge, they memorized it, and they recreated it or reproduced it. There was nothing new, right? They were given something and they gave it back in the exam. creation of something completely new, which demonstrates their learning, is an authentic learning element. Articulation simply refers to the fact that you may just be verbally or in writing expressing your learning. So, you know, creation, when I say a product, that can include a speech or an essay, can be a product of your learning. But it's the ability to explain what you have learned or demonstrate what you have learned. And finally, there's the element of coaching and scaffolding. Now, this obviously is where the teacher's role comes in, but it's not exclusively the teacher's role. So teachers support and help make the connections, right? If you think of scaffolding as supporting, but also remember when you build something, you use the scaffolding while you are building, but then you must be able to take the scaffolding away and the building must stand by itself. So it's a lovely, also again, a nice metaphor for the learning process where you support, but at the end, the learner has to be able to stand by himself or herself. The last thing I also want to say about coaching and scaffolding is that it doesn't have to be done by the teacher. And in fact, in many cases, the student, the fellow student, the peer who has just learned something is a better teacher than you who's known it for years, right? The student who's just realized, I get that concept, is the best person to explain it to the student who hasn't got it, because they have just bridged the gap. So those are the elements that Harrington et al. Outline. And if we just very quickly look at the key 21st century skills, we can see obviously where there's a lot of parallel here. In collaboration, you'll find students making decisions and choices, problem solving, sharing, the reflection is there, one of those key skills. All the things to do with creating and articulating come through or use the skills of filtering and processing information, communicating with multimedia, and obviously innovating and creating. And in the whole notion of an authentic task, we have students planning, organizing, taking risks, and of course, overcoming failure when things don't work out. But let's have a look at that piece in the middle and try and work towards really understanding this by doing and thinking about this yourself. And this is where I said at the beginning that a piece of paper might be and a pen might be a useful instrument to have with you, a useful tool, right? So I want you to think now for a minute about a topic or a subject that you teach and a central concept that students need to learn. Now, obviously, if you're in high school, then the subject is easy to think of. If you're teaching primary and it's more kind of cross-curricular, think of a central concept, something that you really need that students need to learn. Now, you are in the business of teaching many, many, many concepts. So just pick one, perhaps that you've recently been teaching or have to teach, and just keep that idea in your mind. And what we're going to look at is, what does it mean to create an authentic context for this learning of this concept? So very briefly, an outline of this, what we mean by an authentic context is basically, whether it's in a physical or a virtual or online environment, it's something that reflects the way the knowledge will be used in real life. So that's the essence of it, as I mentioned before. When we use a scenario as a basis for a complex task, this is where students take on different roles or are given the opportunities to think and act like experts, using their imagination. So they're imagining the scene is real. If you're in a classroom, you can't put the students in the real life context. Obviously, workplace learning or any kind of taking students out to field trips is where we take students into the real world to learn. But 90% of what we do, if not all of it, is done in the four walls of a classroom. So we want the students to imagine that they are experts, right? And that they are applying their learning accordingly. We'll look at some examples in a minute just to illustrate this. So thirdly, in the process of completing an authentic task and scenario, students might use technology tools to help them learn, right? To do the problem solving, to collaborate, to create, to reflect. So, you know, if we want students to collaborate, they can use a Google Docs or Google Hangout, or whether it's Padlet, which we're going to have a look at just now, or whatever tools you use. These are, again, add-ons, right? You can have an authentic learning environment without a single technology tool, but they are things that are very useful and can be used effectively in an authentic learning environment. The last thing is the task. So we create a scenario, and as I say, I'll give you some examples in a second. But the idea of an authentic task is that it is complex. Life is complex, right? Life is not a series of tick box tasks. Okay? We all have tick box things to do, but generally speaking, we in real life tasks have complexity and they take time, right? A complex task is not done in one lesson. A complex task takes place over a period of time. It may be broken down into smaller parts that can be done lesson by lesson, but it's carried out over this longer time. And so the task that is at the heart of any authentic learning environment is a complex one. It includes lots of different perspectives. It uses a variety of resources. It has a diversity of outcomes and multiple solutions, right? A complex task does not have one right answer. And at the end of it all, the students are creating and producing, not merely recreating and reproducing an end product. And finally, in all of this, again, the third thing in the center of that model was authentic assessment. Assessment is integrated seamlessly in all of this. It is not something separate, it's not something done at the end. It may be done at the end, but it's not completely removed from the task. We'll talk a little bit more about assessment later on. So let me just give you a couple of examples because I think this will help it make sense, more sense of this. So a complex, an authentic task, for example, if you were doing students doing literature study with students and they had to write book reviews. Now book reviews are something students often do in primary school as well, in a slightly different context. I don't know if any of you remember them. I remember book reviews when I was at school as being the most painful thing to have to do, though I was an avid reader. It wasn't the reading part that I didn't like, but it was the writing the book reviews. So here's a scenario, right? Students are told or asked to imagine the role as editorial board members of an online journal. And they are required to submit book reviews of the literature that they've studied to this board and collaboratively design a guide to writing a good book review. So here you can see the complex task, right? They're doing two things. They're writing book reviews, but then they are evaluating those book reviews and drawing conclusions about what makes a good one. So instead of being told, this is a good book review, write one like this, they are working all of this out for themselves. So there's an example of a complex task, but also the scenario that they are editorial board members. Here's one for business. If you are teaching something to do with negotiation skills, management skills, the context is students imagine that they are running a virtual restaurant and they have all kinds of issues which require negotiated solutions and the use of those skills. So students would take on different roles. Some of them would be managers, some would be staff, and they would go through a process of negotiating, for example, wages, working conditions, safety, equity, all sorts of things. In the process, they are then learning the skills and the concepts that are required, okay, as opposed to being given this as information. Let's move to, I don't know how many of you here are from a higher ed environment, but research methods, for example. Instead of just teaching students this is how you do research, students are given the role as being researchers and they're given an actual task. So for example, looking at the impact of a school closure in a rural community, they need to go and research that. And in the process of doing the research, they will obviously have to learn what are the applicable methods and acceptable ways of doing it. And they would have data that they would be able to access. It may be real life data, but it doesn't have to be. It could be done virtually with raw data, you know, you can made up for them if necessary. But they would analyze that and produce a report, and in the process, they would learn these methods. Two quick science ones then to finish off. This is slightly different. This is, well, yes, there's a role thing here. So students, imagine students are biologists who've gone to on an expedition to a remote Siberian lake, and they have to identify these and classify these newly discovered life forms. So microorganisms that have been found and nobody knows what they are. They have to analyze the cellular structures of these organisms as, you know, these collective specimens and prepare a report on what they have found. So here you can see there's a kind of implied story behind this. They are imagining that they are scientists instead of students in a classroom, right? They're playing that role. And there's a story behind it. This is a brand new found organism. Nobody knows what it is. How are you going to establish this? Okay, so any microorganism that they might be required to study could have a story around it like this, where the students imagine this scenario. I remember having to study creatures, organisms, amoebas and hydras and strange things like that. I still can't tell you today what they were all about or what use they were to me, but this would have been a much more fun way of doing it than simply being given a diagram, which I had to then label and learn the labels of. Right, so here you see the example of a kind of real life scenario. And there's one last one. This is a nice example of things that can then go cross-curricular. So chemistry, learning the things about the periodic tables, looking at some basic chemistry fundamentals from chemical composition and states and balances and things like acid and base and reactions, bonding, all of these chemical concepts. Honing in on giving students a project as a team to design and create and sell perhaps a soap product, right? And in the process, they've got to understand all these things about acids and alkalines and all various other chemical processes. Obviously, there are lots of cross-curricular angles here if you relate this to business skills and writing skills and all kinds of things that can be done with that as well. Okay, so I hope that's given you a little bit of an idea of the sort of thing that you can do in terms of creating an authentic scenario or and task. Now, ideally, we would have done a collaborative task right now. If we were in a face-to-face classroom, you would all be sitting in a group and you'd put your heads together and start coming up with some ideas. Unfortunately, the webinar format we are using today does not allow me to put you in breakout rooms, which I had hoped to do. So we're going to do this task individually, and then we'll make it a little collaborative by another means. So let me just say there, very important when you're teaching online and teaching with technology, you always need to have a plan B and also to be flexible and know that there's got to be another way to do something when you haven't necessarily always got the ideal way, or the ideal way isn't going to work for you on that particular day. So what I want you to do now, I'd like you to think about that idea that I asked you to come up with a little while ago. What is that central concept that your students need to learn in your subject or year group? And where would they use it in real life? So you've got a concept in your mind. Where would students use that in real life? And how could you then create an authentic context? So what scenario, what story, what roles could these students pretend to play? And within what kind of complex task? Okay, so this is what you're going to think about. I will give you a bit of time to come up with your brilliant ideas. And once you've got that idea, I'd like you to think about how or where you could integrate as many of the authentic learning elements as possible. It's not always possible to do all of them every time, but as many as possible. So those were the ones, remember, about where would the students collaborate? What would their end product be? What would they create to show that they've learned this concept? Where could they connect with experts, other points of view? What would your role perhaps be as a coach or scaffolder, or who else could play that role? And then only I want you to think about what tools could the students use to help them with these things, to help them collaborate or reflect or create, right? So tools come at the end. Okay, everyone got an idea of what they're thinking along the lines? These instructions will be available when you start doing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a Padlet wall. And I'm trying to, because we haven't been able to do this quite as collaboratively as I would have liked, we're going to do this as an individual task, but with the use of feedback to aid part of that collaborative process. So it will still give you some collaboration rather than none at all. So I'm going to paste into the chat in a second a link to a Padlet wall. All you've got to do is copy and paste that link. So you'll open another window. You can just minimize this one. You'll see the Padlet page, which will look like what you see at the bottom of the screen there, and the group tasks details are all there as well. So you don't have to come back to the screen. You can just have that one open. I'd like you to take about 10 minutes. Obviously, you can do it much quicker, but no more than 10 minutes to come up with your idea for your authentic scenario and your task, and where you would fit in these elements. And then I want you to pop that onto the Padlet wall. What you'll do if you've never used Padlet before, down the bottom right of the screen, you'll see a plus sign. You just click on that plus sign and it will open up a box where you can type in text, you can upload a document, you can upload a picture. I'm assuming you will type things, but there are other ways of doing this. I'm not prescribing how you share your idea, but you'll put it there onto the Padlet wall. And after 10 minutes, I'm going to ask you, or obviously sooner if you're finished, ask you to then respond to at least 3 others, ideas, but you know, as many as we can in the time available. So if we say it's now, I make it 2:45, we'll take around 20 minutes before we come back to the main screen again. Okay, so let me just put this into it. There we go. Oh dear, wrong one. Oh dear, I copied and pasted something else. Right, okay, technical hitch here. Mega, do you have those slides available? Wait a minute, I'm going to get them to you now. Okay, technical hitch, give me a minute, guys.
Is it on the PPT, Claire?
I'm just looking for my Padlet thing. I had copied and pasted it earlier already. Sorry, copied it earlier to paste, but then when I copied the link to this thing, I messed it up. Okay, nearly there. There we go. Right, so I'm going to pop that in the chat there. Okay, so there's your link. If you'll just click on that link and it'll open up in another window, and you'll see that page that I just showed you on the slide. Give it a little bit of time to think and then start popping your ideas in there. I'll be watching and responding, and each respond to one another as much as you can. That would be wonderful. Okay, so let's let those creative juices flow. Have a look at what others are doing, get an idea. Don't be scared to post something. You can't do it wrong, okay? It's an idea, it's a concept that you teach. Put it out there, and when you comment on one another's, put something there that's helpful in the sense of, you know, not say, oh, this is great, but love your idea. How about thinking, you know, you could add this idea for the students to reflect on it, or any other things that you could contribute to that, so that it becomes a little bit more collaborative than just your own input. Okay, so over to you guys. I'm going to stop talking. Sorry, I've been talking for a very long time. So let's see what you come up with. Oh dear. Okay, so some people have got browser issues. Are you not seeing the page at all? If you can, sorry, those who just, if you have had a problem just using the link, make sure you try and, if you've got Chrome browser or Firefox, if you can paste it into that browser, not rather than perhaps your default one, you'll probably have a more successful result. So if you've got a different browser that you can open and pop the link into, that will help. Otherwise, please just use the old-fashioned pen and paper. Deepti, I see that you've had a challenge there. So if it doesn't work for you, write it on paper. We can always share it afterwards. I'm seeing some excellent ideas coming through already. Keep going. This is wonderful. Right, if you've if you haven't put your idea onto the Padlet yet, please add what you can, even if it's incomplete now, and start looking at commenting on each other's ideas and adding to the wonderful ideas that are there already. I will have another 5 minutes or so. We're going to give another 3 minutes for some added comments. Obviously, you can add to this Padlet even after the session. I'll keep it open, and we can share it with everyone afterwards as well. Some great ideas. Let's see a few more comments on each other's ideas, please. I see someone saying that they haven't been able to respond to a comment. In the add comment part below, it should be, I see other people are adding comments, it's definitely enabled. It may be just a software thing of your own. Sorry about that if you can't actually respond. Okay, I'm going to stop you now. The creative juices are flowing fast. Well done. I think you're all getting the idea. Some excellent examples used there. And what I suggest you do is continue this idea with your colleagues back at your own school, so that you can actually do this collaboratively. Your team of subject specialists or year group colleagues, get them together and say, right, let's redesign something and let's think about it from the point of view of these authentic learning elements, and what sort of scenario can we create, what task can we create, and then bounce your ideas off each other. You can see as the comments come in how, you know, new ideas and new angles come at it, and you can really come up with some brilliant ideas for this. So I am cognizant of the time, so let's go back to our screen. Sorry, just trying to find the right one here. That's the right one. Yep. Okay. Okay. So the if you can just minimize your Padlet window, and we'll go back to the to where we left off, and just recap quickly. So there are the different elements that you were considering. Obviously, you can see sometimes, some things are obvious for a certain task and others less so. You don't have to use all the elements all the time, but the key is your context and your task, and then the authentic assessment, which I'll have a look at with you in a minute. So really what I wanted to come back to, my point I made right at the beginning, is that when you integrate new technology into the classroom, it gives you an opportunity to rethink your approach. So having had to move into an online space, having, in many cases, I think in the schools, had to get your learners to do much more independent learning, it means you need to rethink your approach. If you're doing worksheets with students and you can stand over them while they do them in the classroom, that's one thing. But if they have to do them on their own, do they want to do a worksheet or do they want to play a game? I think we know which one will win that one. So getting them to do something that really motivates them and engages their creativity and their love of learning, which students, youngsters especially, naturally have. I think we knock it out of them in our schools, sadly. There are so many opportunities. So having had this change forced upon us, we need to use it to rethink our approaches. And this is the way that technology very often works as a catalyst for change, because we're forced to do something in a different way by the technology. In this case, forced. It's not normally forced, it's normally a choice. But you may be told you all have to use iPads, whatever it was at the time. It gives you this opportunity to rethink your approach. So just to recap our objectives, because there's one more I still want to touch on. We've talked about the key skills for 21st century learning and what they were. We've now explored a little bit of the elements of authentic learning. I know we've only touched the surface of it. This, by the way, is an entire course that our students do at Murdoch called Teaching and Learning with Technology, and we explore all of these elements in a lot of detail and really thrash out what it means to use them. You've all started looking at creating a plan for making learning more authentic, and we've touched on the importance of using technology to transform learning, but I'd like to let us reflect a little bit more on that idea of transforming learning via technology. And so I just wanted to highlight quickly something some of you are no doubt familiar with, but I know many people have never heard of it, and that is what is known as the SAMR model by Ruben Puentedura. And Puentedura came up with this concept of the way we use technology, and he says there are these 4 different levels. So the first one is substitution, the second is augmentation, and these can enhance the learning experience. But we need to move to the levels of modification and redefinition in order to really transform learning. If I can give you an example of what we've done today to illustrate these concepts. So substitution, instead of having a face-to-face session together, we have used Zoom. All right, so I have used Zoom as a substitute tool. Okay, instead of standing in front of you, we have used this technology, but it hasn't really functionally changed anything. In fact, it obviously, in this case, takes away from the real experience, but it does the job, right? So I'm using the tool as a delivery platform instead of standing in front of the room. So that's substitution, and unfortunately, a lot of technology used in schools is used at the substitution level. So in other words, you're using a tool, but you could use the tool, you could do the same task without the tool and it would amount to the exact same thing. Often the tool has a novelty value here, which maybe gets the students' interest for a while, but it soon wears off. So we've always got to be careful that we're not limiting a tool to just being a substitute. If we look at the next level of augmentation, if we take something like, this is where the technology is a substitute, but it has a functional improvement. So let's stick with the Zoom idea. The chat function in Zoom, for example. Now, if we were in a face-to-face scenario here, you could put your hands up, you could say these things out loud. I would give you an opportunity to share that. And let's face it, that would be wonderful if we could be doing that. However, with 70-something of you in the room, how many of you would really get to say something, right? So the chat actually augments the experience. It gives more people a chance to say things. And in particular, and you've probably all seen this with your own learners or in your own experience as yourselves, those of us who are less verbal or more reticent in speaking up get the opportunity to express ourselves a lot more. So there, Zoom is an augmentation as a tool because the chat part is the augmentation, because it enhances the learning experience for many people. If we move on to modification, this is where we're now able to sort of redesign the way we do things. And here I think if we looked at something like the Padlet wall that we've just used, again, you could all have sat there and written down your ideas on a piece of paper and perhaps talked a little bit about them. And maybe we could have put some, flip charts up on the wall where you illustrated them, or we'd give each group or person a chance to tell us what their idea was, to share their idea with us. Again, think of the time that that can take. And sometimes it can get a bit tedious, can't it? The Padlet allows everyone to put their ideas out there and for everyone to see immediately what those ideas are and to be able to comment on them. Normally when you get students to do something in a group and then present their findings, there's no time for everyone to comment on each of those activities. Sometimes the teacher is the only one who comments. But this allows for, I think you can see here, a real modification of the learning experience, because we can share and do so much more with it. And then redefinition is when you take it to a whole new level, right? This is this is when things that you could not do without technology. So, for example, some of you had the idea of getting students to create a video which demonstrated their learning. You can't do that with paper, all right? You need the technology for that. So this is where we need to look at the tools that really transform learning, things that we could never have done before, allow us to really redefine. That's taking it to the level of transformation that we really want. Sorry, I just want to find the chat. I've lost track of it again. Okay, there it is. No, it's gone. Sorry, give me a second, guys. I just want to get back to the chat, which has escaped me. Just in case I'm missing something. If I'm not missing anything, maybe I can leave it. Why is it not showing up? All right, Mega, if I'm missing anything important in the chat, please let me know. I seem to have lost contact with it for now. Anyway, all right, so that's the SAMR model. You can look it up, you can read all about it. It's something that's really worth exploring. When you consider how you're going to use technology, think about what you really gain by using the tool that you're getting the students to use. Does it add new features? Does it really change what you're doing? And try and take it to the M and the R levels as much as possible. All right, the last thing I wanted to just share with you before we close off this session on this topic is authentic assessment, okay? And the essence of this is just that authentic assessment is constructive, right? It involves creating or producing knowledge, not simply reproducing. So the traditional examination that students do in schools, where they basically are asked to recall content and simply reproduce what you have taught them, is not authentic assessment, okay? Obviously, this means you're asking students to do things that are perhaps more inquiry-based. You're asking students in authentic assessment to organize their learning, to analyze it, to put it together, to integrate everything and create a new product that demonstrates what they have learned. And obviously, authentic assessment, therefore, is based on much higher order thinking skills and problem-solving skills. So assessment is often a big, well, it's at the heart of this issue, actually, because I know teachers always say to me, oh, I'd love to change all of these things, but I have to assess them in a certain way. I have to teach them so that they can pass the exam. So this is where the change really starts, okay? You need to look at changing the way you assess. And I know that's not always in your control, but there are always ways to include authentic assessment, even if you have to do it differently at the end and potentially undermine it all, but at least you integrate your assessment throughout. So while students are doing all these things, when students create a video to share what they've learned, that will tell you what they have learned or how well they have learned it, okay? That creation should be part of your integrated assessment. So I think the best way I can illustrate the issue with assessment that we find ourselves facing is the two models. This was discussed by the now late, sadly great Sir Ken Robinson, who I see passed away this past weekend. And he spoke about two models of assessment that we find in in our world and in our classrooms. And the one you'll recognize, first of all, is the fast food model. So I want you to think McDonald's, right? If you run a McDonald's franchise, you are given standardized criteria, right? You are told this is how you will do things. The menu, the ingredients, everything is specified. The service, the decor, the dress, everything is specified. It's prescribed, if you like, so that everything is the same. The idea is that if you go and have a McDonald's burger in Dubai, it will be the same as having a McDonald's burger in Singapore or Timbuktu, right? The idea is that there's a notion of standardization being a kind of a guarantee of quality. Okay, you can expect the same thing. Of course, when we say quality guaranteed, we have to remember that fast food is generally most often not very good for you. So yes, this is one way of doing it. And this, of course, is, I'm sure you will all recognize, the model used by schools, that the standardized, everything is prescribed, everything must be the same, and therefore we will have a guarantee of quality, but it's not necessarily good for you. The other model is what Robinson called the Michelin Guide model. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Michelin Guide, but it's a system of evaluating restaurants, and obviously, and the top restaurants in the world have 5 stars in their Michelin stars. And the way this is done is that there are specific criteria outlined for excellence, but not how to meet them. In other words, nothing is dictated. Each restaurant looks at those criteria for excellence and finds a way to meet those criteria in the best possible ways. They are then judged by experts on what a great restaurant is all about. Okay, so there's criteria, but there's no standardized way of meeting those criteria. There are lots of different ways of meeting it. Every restaurant, therefore, is unique and different, but quality is still guaranteed. And that's really the opposite, as you can see, of the fast food model. And it's the way we need to rethink assessment as well. So I'm going to leave those metaphors with you to consider when you think about how you manage assessment. Where we're at now, it's the time, if ever there hasn't been a better time, to really reimagine education, right? It's the time to prepare students for the future, not the past. And it's a time for you to prepare yourself to lead this change, right? We really, really do need to bring learning into the 21st century. And we've had a nice little shove from the pandemic. We have to look at the positive side of that. We've had a nice little shove to get us into this stage. So we need to try and capitalize on that. And in order to do that, they're obviously one of the ways we've got students, and I see some students who are going to join us on the course very soon. I look forward to having you there to learn more about this whole concept of authentic online learning. So we have a unit, if anyone's interested, on teaching and learning with technology. And this is where, coming back to my point right at the beginning, the technology is very often this catalyst for changing classroom practice. But in order to do that, it's not about focusing on the tools, right? It's not about the platform you're using. It's about making your learning authentic, your environment authentic, and so that your classroom reflects the real world. And that's the challenge that I put out to all of you today, in making your classroom meaningful and engaging your 21st century learners. We have lots of units at in the Murdoch MEd, and you can obviously find out information. We're going to have a little bit of time for some Q&A on this in a minute, so I just wanted to highlight a couple of quick things, and then I'm going to hand over to you. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, where you can type in some questions. But if you want to become a leader of change, obviously a Master of Education is one way of doing it. I also just wanted to tell you very briefly about our teacher leadership course, because this, if you're not ready to start a master's right away, you may be interested in this. And because we have a special offer to participants in the webinar today. So normally this course costs 1,500 dirhams. It's a 20-hour course. We're offering it to everyone who's signed up for today's webinar at 750. I know that sounds like a lot, but if you have a look over on the left, for those of you who want to perhaps start the MEd later, you'll find that that can actually save you 7,000 dirhams, because it gives you 3 credit points as you start the MEd program. It involves, as I said, 20 hours of professional development. You get a certificate, and we're going to be offering it this trimester as an online course with a combination of asynchronous and synchronous sessions. In other words, you'll do some of it on your own, or actually the way it's designed, you do it with somebody else. But there'll be weekly sessions via a platform like Zoom. It won't be Zoom, using, getting together and doing actually creative and active and interactive activities. And that will run starting, these are the tentative dates in October, from the 7th of October for 5 weeks on a Wednesday. So if you want to know more about that, we're happy to give you some further information. I'm going to leave those details on the screen while you type your questions in, and Mega and I will answer those as we progress from here. So over to you, please. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you've learned something useful. We will share this additional material, the slides and that, if you'd like, just let us know. But let's see what questions you might have about this or about the courses and the leadership course, etc., that we have on offer. Okay, so there's the Q&A button you'll find at the bottom of your screen. I'm just going to, I think I'm going to stop sharing, then I can get a better idea here. Okay, so I'm going to take those slides off and put my video back on. Right, do we get any e-certificate today? Mega, do we have attendance of some sort from this? We don't usually do that for a webinar, but if you need any confirmation of the 2 hours you've spent today, I'm sure we can provide something for that.
Yes, I think we can provide a participation. So if
yeah, that would be great. That would be nice. Thanks, Mega. Recorded webinar. This recording will be posted on a platform, and you will be notified where you can access it. Yes, so it will be available. There's no obviously privacy issues. Nobody's identified in the participant side. But if you do need to re-access the recording of the slides and the session, yes, that will be available.
So we will be sending you a feedback form and also the link to the webinar, which should be in one of our social media channels. So yes, we'll send that to you later today or tomorrow.
Great, thank you. And feedback is always very, very welcome and appreciated. Thanks for your patience with a few little technical glitches, and so my apologies that we couldn't really do a proper breakout group. But I'd love to, feedback is always very, very welcome. If we're going to do any more of these, we'd like to know how to do them better. Any questions on the program, master's program itself, or on the teacher leadership? If anyone's, we'll send you some additional information on that, or certainly if you ask for it, you can access more information in terms of what is involved and more details on the timings, etc., when it's ready.
We have someone who's raised a hand. Maybe I'll just unmute them. So Asma, I think if you unmute, you'll be able to ask your question.
After the student, after I use the Padlet for the student work, how I keep the student work.
Sorry, Asma, that was breaking up very badly. Can you repeat your question, please?
After I use the Padlet for the group activity, how I keep the activity? And how to give them the feedback by writing.
How will you receive the feedback for your activities, ideas? Or no, I'm not really
Claire,
bad.
I think she wants to know how to use Padlet for
Oh,
for the activities.
okay. How do you use Padlet? Or
I would for the students. How I check it.
so Padlet, yes. So if you haven't come across Padlet before, it's some simple thing. You just go to padlet.com. You sign up and create yourself an account. The students don't need to have an account, but they can. If they do, then their names will appear, for example, when they contribute to it. But you can just create an account, and then you have these templates that are there, and you choose, and you can create. A free account allows you to create, I think it's 5 different Padlets. There's a paid version which can do lots more, but there's certainly quite enough from the free version, and you just create the wall, and then your students can create on that, and then you can share that Padlet wall afterwards, so you're able to save it. And I will suggest that we will do that. So if anyone wants to still add more ideas and comment on the Padlet wall, which I really think would be valuable, I'll leave the wall open for another 12 hours or so, and then we will share that wall with the other information that Mega has mentioned she will share with everybody. So that can be done for students. And then obviously it's a great way for you to give feedback to your students and for students to give feedback to one another. Does that answer it? Sorry, I'm again not sure if I've got your question correct. Asma, forgive me if I've misunderstood. How to take out the data from Padlet. Okay, I've just seen that in the thing. Thank you, Zayad. Yeah, so on the Padlet wall, I can only do this because I set it up. But there is a button that allows you to share it, and it then downloads it either as an image or more usefully as a PDF. And then you can share that. So we will share that with everybody. I see there's a question there from Marika. How will the teacher leadership certificate benefit a teacher for promotion within a school? Well, it certainly will give you, I believe, tools and a lot of confidence to really make changes and make a difference in your school. And if that doesn't help you get promotion, I don't know what will. It's not a qualification as such, like the master's degree is, but it's certainly something that equips you to look at ways of handling change and driving change and managing people within your school from wherever you are, right? I must stress, and we've deliberately called it teacher leadership and not educational leadership, but it's leadership for anybody. The notion of teacher leadership is that everyone can be a leader in their school. Even if you're just a teacher, you are able to lead through the various tools that you will learn about on that course. If you are already a school leader, it's also extremely useful because it teaches you a lot of other communication skills, conflict management skills that are always useful in any management environment. But it also helps you understand how you can use your teachers to help improve your school. By empowering them through a kind of distributed leadership model to bring about change. I will ask Mega to share some more details of that certificate and some of the things that students have said in the past, because they have all really commented on its usefulness in helping them with being able to really change things in their schools. Any other questions?
Claire, there's a question on the Q&A window from Shaima.
Oh, sorry, I didn't go down. Yes, thank you. What are the suitable activities for groups nowadays with the small children? I wonder if I'm not a teacher of small children myself, but anybody else like to offer some suggestions, perhaps in the chat on that one, if you're early years or smaller children? Obviously, I think you've got to bear in mind, depending on the age of the children, there is an age at which children don't really collaborate, okay? And they play independently, they may play alongside each other, but they don't play with each other. So then, that's a kind of, you don't want to be necessarily looking at group activities. It wouldn't be appropriate there. But I think true of all ages, group activities need to be managed Students should know about different roles in a group, for example, if they know this person's in charge of, you know, taking notes, or if it's younger children, the student's going to take some pictures or draw some pictures. Somebody else is responsible for making sure nobody fights with anybody else. Okay, everybody has a role to play in that group in order for it to work. But you know, groups can do so many different activities. It depends on what it is that you're trying to do with them. What are the concepts that you are looking to convey and work with? It's a very broad question. But anyway, if anyone's got any suggestions to pop into the chat for anybody, please do so.
We have Hannah who wants to ask a question, so I'm going to just unmute her for a second.
Yes, Hannah?
Yes, thank you so much. I also have a question about Padlet. How many times we can use it for free, and how we can delete the old Padlets? Thank you.
Yeah, so you've got a strange echo on your thing. You said how many times can you use?
How many times we can use it for free?
Oh, I see. Okay, so you can, the version I use, which is for free, has 5 Padlets. So I can create 5 Padlets, but I can reuse them. So in other words, when I'm finished with a Padlet, I can just delete everything on it and then create a new one. So you can reuse and reuse and reuse. You can use them over and over again. So there's quite a lot of scope even in the free version. And there was a second part to your question, Hannah?
My second part, how to delete the old Padlets.
Oh yes, yeah. So there's simply a button that says in the settings that says delete the Padlet, and then it will disappear altogether. So, for example, if you've used 5 and you can't create another new one, you can delete one that you finished with, and simply start a new Padlet in that way. And the concept of the wall has lots of different things. It can be done in, you know, the thing, and also you can move things around on that wall. It can be arranged in different ways. You can create timelines on it. There are lots of different formats in terms of the way you can do that. If you go to Padlet.com, there are, you know, short instructional videos there that quickly tell you all the things it can do. It's a really user-friendly tool, and I use it a lot with my students just because it's one of the simpler ones. It doesn't require students to have an account. Though, as I said, if students do have an account, then it helps because their names come up instead of just anonymous. But that's not always what you want. I see some other questions in there. Playing games while learning important? Yes, absolutely. Anything to do with games. Let's face it, what we learn with pleasure, we never forget. And we should keep games in the classroom. I don't think it's just for young children, it's for everybody. There was also a question somewhere about scholarships. That one's disappeared. Did you see that one? I just very quickly, I did see somebody was asking whether any scholarships for studying the masters. Yes, there are scholarships for merit scholarships, academic scholarships, ranging from sort of, I think it's 5 to 40%, depending on transcripts that you produce. We have an additional 5%, which is an early bird. I'm not sure we're still in early birds, are we, Mega? But also just to mention that anybody who applies or enrolls, but I'm told it's only for today, there's another whole 10%. I'm going to just say very quickly, the cost of the masters, you know, can be quite challenging for teachers, but we have a lot of our students who apply for what we call recognition of prior learning or advanced standing. If you have many years of experience or you've done a master's degree before, you can be awarded up to 12 points credit, which then obviously cuts the cost by a third and the amount of time taken by a third. So we have a lot of students. We've actually got a fabulous group of students joining us now in September who have many, many years of experience. amongst them, each individually, and most of them are starting with this 12 points, and so it makes it much more affordable for teachers. We know times are tough for you guys. It's really sad when I look at how hard teachers have had to work and step up to the plate and then have had their salaries cut. Anyway, other questions? I see do we have a reference we can consult with authentic learning? Yes. So in the slides, you'll find at the end, I haven't put it up yet, but the last slide is a reference list, and you'll find there anything by Harrington, and there's quite a lot online as well, can give you some more information about authentic learning. Thanks for those questions. Still got a little bit of time if anyone has more. Question here from Ferdinand. Do you think authentic activities have consequences that extend a particular discipline? Can it encourage learners to adopt diverse roles and think in interdisciplinary? Yes. I think that's one of the important things about it. I don't know if you have any experience of things like project-based or inquiry-based learning, which tend to go sort of across disciplines, transdisciplinary learning. But when you create an authentic task, and I think if you look at the examples that we used, that I gave you, the opportunity for interdisciplinary learning is immediately multiplied just because of the complexity of the task. It doesn't become limited to just the concepts in science, for example. It can be extended to concepts across other discipline areas as well. And that is generated by the creation of a complex task. It just opens up that focus straight away. So it helps to kind of collaborate with your colleagues on this kind of thing. You know, I remember when I first started teaching, which was a very long time ago, theme teaching was all the rage, right? And we used to take a theme, and then we would, all the different subjects, I taught high school, so all the different subjects would have something to do with that theme. And what used to happen was it became about the theme, it became about the topic, not the skills, not the concepts, it became about the topic. And kids would get bored with it, right? After 6 weeks of doing this theme in all the different subjects, students would say, oh, we're so sick of hearing about whatever the theme was. So this goes way beyond that, right? When we start with that concept, the idea that this is a real life task, and you create that complex task, it then becomes interdisciplinary, but it's not artificially matched together with this theme, okay? I'm not saying themes don't have a place, but they have their limits. So this is very different to that. And I think it certainly does extend particular disciplines in a very useful way. Thanks for that question. How can we convince students, last question, that these roles are real for them? They don't have to perform as a course requirement. I think sometimes it takes a little bit of practice for students to get into that imagine role. Now you must remember, younger kids live in an imaginary world a lot of the time. So the younger the students, the easier that is, because they love to imagine and role play. And sadly, in schools, we tell them to sit down and sit in rows and do things all the same. So we knock that imagination out of them. So it's something that if you've got a group of students who've had it knocked out of them, you have to kind of cultivate it back. So I think, look, they you know, I don't know what age group you're referring to there, Emanuela, but you know, teenagers, for example, are not, you can't convince them that it's real. They know it's imagine, but they are, it's like, you know what, if you think about it, when kids play games online, right, that's not real. But the things they do and the way they get involved in it is very real for them. The excitement, the motivation, everything that's in that is real. And that's what this is about. It's getting that motivation that's real. And the idea that if you want to be a scientist one day, well, then let's imagine you're a scientist now. Let's get a feel for what that's like, so that you can start to think like a scientist. And I think that's how one has to convince them. You're not asking them to perform. It's not a drama test. It's not a course requirement that they perform. But I think, as I say, it's sometimes, particularly with older kids, teenagers, it might take a little bit of doing it a few times before they become more comfortable with it. Again, the more one does these things, the better students get at the success of it.
I see Asma has her hand raised, so I've unmuted her first for a minute. Hi, Asma. Do you have a question?
Sorry. ما كنت رافعة يدي. Okay.
Asma, sorry, but your voice is breaking. We cannot hear you at all. Do you want to type it out, perhaps on the question and answer window or even the regular chat, please? Because we are not able to hear you, Asma.
Oh, there you are. Thank you. Right. Thank you, Asma. If you did have a question as well, please do put it in there. Otherwise, if you were just saying thank you for that. Appreciate it. And it's been lovely having you with us. I do wish we'd been in a face-to-face. You know, just not being able to see everybody is challenging. But I hope that you've at least all received something useful from this for now. I have put at the end of this, the end of the slides, also just contact details. If you want to know more from any of us about anything, please feel free to get in touch. We'd be happy to assist with anything else that we might be able to help with.